churn only happens when you're not delivering value. If people are not satisfied with your product and they're not receiving value, they're going to leave. And it's as basic as that. So when you think about the problem and the challenge is being able to measure that value you deliver and measure it really well to the extent that you know what to do and how to improve it and how to increase the value you deliver. That's where I think the companies really, really excel.
So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing. And you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi there, Innovator. It's great to be back with another episode. Yes, of course, it's that time of week again. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I trust you also enjoyed my conversations with Brian Dixon, the author of Start With Your People, and with Barry Magliarditi of The Game Changers. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Andrew Michael. Andrew is the Business Intelligence Manager at Hotjar, and he's also host of the Churn FM podcast, the podcast for subscription economy pros to learn how the world's fastest growing companies are tackling churn and using customer retention to fuel their growth. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transformational Marketing Hub, where you'll find a host of free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. You can access the Transformational Marketing Hub at any time by visiting innovabiz.co/VIP. So go check it out. You know you want to. It's free to join. And if you're already a member, of course, you just log in and get the resources. In our discussion today, Andrew talked to me about customer retention and making the customer the centre of all you do, right throughout your organisation. He also outlined some ways to create exceptional onboarding processes to help retain your customers for the long term. And we talked about measuring value and considering lifetime customer value over the long term. Without further ado, then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Andrew Michael. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from Cyprus in the Mediterranean, a business intelligence manager at Hotjar and host of the Churn FM podcast, Andrew Michael. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. It's a privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you, Jürgen. It's great to be here today.
Now, Andres Purdy, who was our guest on episode 195 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we interview you, Andrew. So a big hello to Andres.
Hey, Andres. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah, Churn FM is a podcast that you've started for subscription economy pros to learn how the world's fastest growing companies tackle churn. And I know, from personal experience, that's a real issue in a lot of companies, and also how they use retention to fuel their growth. And with Hotjar, you're, as I said, the business intelligence manager, and Hotjar provides analytics and feedback to app and website owners so that they can truly understand user behavior. And as a user of Hotjar, I know that it's really powerful, a really powerful tool, and can give you some really good insights into what people are doing on your website. Now, before we start talking about all things business growth and retention and churn and analytics, give us a bit more about your background. Give us a high-level snapshot of how you got to where you are today and what some of the pivotal moments in that journey were.
Yeah, great. So, as you mentioned, today I'm at Hotjar and the host of Churn FM, but prior to joining Hotjar, I was an entrepreneur and founder myself. So I've built 4 different products over the series of the last 12 to 14 years now. Made a series of really great mistakes, managed to exit a couple of those companies, not for much money, but a lot of lessons at the end of the day. Through that journey as well, actually, the previous company that I founded was a company called Ad Jelly. And after making several mistakes in the previous company, I actually reached out to David Dominan, who was the CEO of Hotjar at the time, and said, look, like I've made several mistakes before. I don't want to do it again. Would you mind being an advisor? And obviously, as the guy he is, he's super helpful, always looking to lend a hand, provide value where he can. So he jumped on that, and that's actually how I started chatting to Hotjar, and where I ended up after we managed to sell the last company. Again, not for much money, but it was just like a good way as well, a soft landing and a fresh start for us to go on the next chapter of our journey. And really, like, Hotjar was an opportunity for me to come in now, understand like a company that's really doing things well. I've seen like enormous growth since I've been at the company. I joined when there was around 28 people. Today we're around 80. I think we're around 7 million in ARR when I joined, and now we're doing 20 million. Or close to 20 million. We're just about to break it in the next month or so, I think. So I had the opportunity to, throughout my career, really like build products, understand the mistakes and flaws in building those products, and then now looking to sort of help Hotjar out on that aspect. And then at the same time, one of the biggest falls and failures, I think, in my career has really been around churn and retention. So hence the motivation to start the podcast and really understand the problem inside and out. So that the same mistake's not replicated.
Yeah, I was going to ask why did you start the Churn FM podcast? So you've just answered that question, and I guess there's a motivation there to learn what best practice is in the area of retaining customers.
Absolutely, and I think it was also motivated just sort of like from this notion that you hear quite a bit, like we found the silver bullet, or it was like 5 friends in 10 days, or it's where people try to quantify and like find the solution to churn in a single action. When you actually start to tackle it, and you see these single actions are very rare and far between, and it doesn't apply to every company. So I think like the biggest learning for me over this like course of the years is really understanding that churn is not the responsibility of an individual team or individual person within a company. It really is a company problem, and it needs to be treated that way, and it needs to be alignment throughout the organization that everybody is working towards a common goal.
Yeah. One of the things, and I mentioned this briefly before we started recording, that always annoys me is when, as a client of a business, you're on some product or service that's an ongoing plan, and I'll name the industries. Telephone industry and internet industry are notorious for this here in Australia. At some point, you'll discover a special offer for new clients, and it might be a discount, or it might be get extra benefits for this plan that I might be on. And when as an existing customer I ask, can I have that? They say, no, that's only for new customers. And I always wonder why people have this obsession with looking after new customers who they don't yet have a relationship with better than the existing customers that they do have a relationship with. So I think, that's one of the, I don't know, is that a mindset thing that contributes to the issue of churn?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a mindset, and it's not having a clear understanding. Because when you actually look at the maths behind it and you look at the dynamics of subscription business, like the biggest lever you can pull in any business is retention, and is looking after your customers that you currently and existing you do have. So like this mindset of only applying new offers to new users and really not looking after your old users is actually hurting you more in the long run. And I think one of the biggest aspects, like just if you look at one area and we touch on is sort of the word of mouth aspect, is once you start annoying existing customers, what tends to happen is that the word of mouth tends to start getting bitter and starts to impact your business. And especially when you're a telco business and you're talking about the volume and the amount of people out there, like one of your biggest growth levers is the word of mouth channel. Even though you do a lot of brand and work around it, at the end of the day, it's like if your customers are happy, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to tell, look, I'm really on this network, I'm loving the connection, it's great, and they're the ones who are going to push you over the end at the finish line. So looking after your existing customers really helps with that word of mouth. And then there's a whole bunch of other aspects where it comes into play, where it actually helps build up your muscle when it comes to the amount of money you can spend on paid media. So I think this is an interesting take, is that when you think about the money that you spend to acquire new customers as a business in advertising, the longer you keep those customers around with you, the longer their lifetime value is, meaning the more money you make from over the course of their lifetime, which allows you then to spend more money on acquiring new customers. So if you're just worried about short-term growth and bringing customers in the door, that's fine and you can do that. But then really you don't have that competitive muscle when it comes to the amount of money you can spend to acquire customers. So companies with really strong retention have this competitive muscle where they can afford to spend more money, and they can end up pushing their competitors out of channels where it becomes non-competitive, and they can spend more money to acquire those customers because they're making more money in the long run. So I think it's very, very short-sighted to sort of think about, like, how do we just bring new customers in the door when there's so many leading indicators to the benefits, and the overall way that you can grow fastest is really retaining customers in the long term.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point about looking at the lifetime value of customers and taking a long-term view in terms of what that means in spending on advertising for new customers in the longer term and an ongoing basis. And also the word of mouth part is really important as well. And we, I guess it's human nature that if we're unhappy, we probably tell more people about it than if we're happy. So
exactly.
To annoy your existing customers is probably a really bad move.
Definitely. It's probably the worst move you can make in business. I would say that.
Yeah, and I wonder if because some of these businesses are really big businesses, they're multinational businesses, and I wonder if there's this, I don't know, if they don't think about this as a strategy. It seems to me to be obvious that if they're going to go out to new clients with a special offer that's public, and that they then tell existing clients, no, you can't have this special offer, that they must know that that's a pretty broken strategy.
Yeah, I think more and more companies are starting to realize this now as well. So it's definitely something that people are becoming more and more awake to now. I definitely see the same challenges, like you say, in other markets with telcos specifically, or with internet providers. They tend to sort of be a little bit behind the curve, which is a little ironic considering they're the ones providing the technological infrastructure. But there are other markets where they have realized this, and they realize that their biggest growth levers is retention. So if you look to the US and the way some of the telcos out there are treating their customers, they're realizing more and more that it's really this nurturing a relationship and trying to build this ongoing value for customers, as opposed to really trying to just bring customers in the door, sign that first contract, and then look to the next new customer.
So what are some of the best practice tactics that you've learned about running the Churn FM podcast?
Yeah, so I think that there's quite a few different best practices when it comes to it. So throughout this podcast, I've actually interviewed different CEOs, different people in roles from like support to customer success to sales, really trying to understand like across the board, across the company, what are some of the good things that companies are doing to tackle churn and increase retention. And I think it's two main areas. And the first really is alignment. So I think it's absolutely critical for any company looking to tackle churn and retention that it's something that alignment is created throughout the organization, from the top down, from CEO. And then when we think about sort of like how work is rewarded and how employees are motivated, it really all needs to come and be aligned with the company's goal of retaining more customers. So if we think about it in the context of a sales environment, like typically sales reps are just there to try and drive and bring in as much new business. But when you think about it in the context of retention, it should then be like, okay, yes, part of that is bringing in new business, but the other part is like, how long is that new business staying with us? So setting and targets and goals that are aligned with retention in mind throughout your organization really helps. The same thing with marketing. So marketing typically is to bring in new leads, to bring in new customers, but then we also need to be looking at what is that LTV of that customer as well, and not just being on that short-sighted first sale. And this goes all throughout product and customer success and so forth. So I think the first thing that companies that manage to tackle this really, really well have this understanding that it is a company problem and not a team problem. And they have this alignment throughout the organization where everybody's focused on that common goal. They've put the customer at the center of it all, and they're really trying to keep people. And then I'd say the second thing, and to a lot of new people to the problem, I think it's a little bit counterintuitive. When you hear the word churn, like the immediate response is typically, okay, like let's go and see the customers that have left. Why have they left? What could we do to save them? How can we win them back? How do we stop this from happening? Where you do see some degree of success there, but the biggest degree of success really comes from making sure that you're onboarding and you're activating new customers in the right way. So your efforts are much better spent trying to make sure people get value from your product from the beginning, rather than trying to win back customers or people that have already decided that their product is not for them. And it comes down to basic psychology, is that like in the beginning, people come to you, they have a problem, they feel that your product can solve that solution, and your best bet is really trying to make sure and prove to them that your company does do it, as opposed to coming in at the end where they've tried it, that hasn't worked for them, and they really feel that, okay, I need to quit this product, it's not doing it for me. It's a lot harder sell and a lot harder work. So the companies that are really doing it well have this really, really solid onboarding and activation strategy behind it. That's there to deliver value as quick as possible, and then be able to create a habit out of that value so that customers are continuously receiving value while using their product. And I think the way I like to think about it, sorry, Jürgen, is like it's prevention is better than churn. And typically like people come to you, they have this problem. And in a sense, like you can think of it as like the Alcoholics Anonymous. They come to you, they have an issue, they want to talk about it, they want to solve it. And in the beginning is really where you have that opportunity to help them. Once they get to sort of that ER stage where you're trying to focus on engagement strategies or resurrection strategies in terms of the ER, that's when it becomes a little bit late. And at that point, it's like you're not even sure if you're solving the right problem for them, because you haven't had that good understanding of your customers, and really just focusing on that early stage when they've come to you with that initial problem and trying to help them solve that, as opposed to at the end where you're just trying to now engineer behavior for the sake of it, and it never works.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, the onboarding one, because particularly if it's a more substantial purchase or if it's a serious problem, I mean, people come to a business with a problem, they're looking for a solution, they might be in pain or they might be frustrated by some situation, and then they kind of sign up for a subscription or they purchase the service, and the next thing they're saying, okay, now what's going to change as a result of me taking that first step? And there's this thing called buyer's remorse often, which I think the buyer's remorse kicks in when they don't hear back, when the experience is, I've paid my money, now what happens? And they're left in that state of, uncertainty, now what happens, for a long time. So I think the onboarding thing, and that can be as simple as here's the next steps. And I'm just going through a process at the moment because we've got an upgrade of our internet here. Australian folks will know when I say NBN. So we're about to go through that at the moment. And I've actually signed up with a provider that, first of all, they took my query on the internet. They called me back within 10 minutes. They walked me through the process of signing up. They sent a text message and an email within another 10 minutes confirming the service and clarifying what the next steps were. They've since then, this is 24 hours ago, they've since then sent about 4 emails and 4 text messages telling me what the next steps are and when things are going to happen. And I thought that's a really good onboarding process, because I'm as long as they deliver on what they're promising, I'm left in no doubt as to how this is going to go forward and what I'm going to get. Whereas I actually also went to my existing provider who kind of said, 5 minutes, we'll have you signed up. And it took me about 10 minutes to go through the form. And then the response was, "We'll get back to you within 4 weeks." I thought, well, there's a really great contrast in that, and the existing provider they have my business currently, so they're likely to, well, they are going to lose my business because of that. But so I think the onboarding thing is so critical, and once the service then starts, I think human nature is, if you've had that really good onboarding experience, and if the business continues to nurture that customer, then, even if things don't go exactly according to expectation, as long as they address the issues, there's a certain level of forgiveness that people are likely to have because of that really good experience to date, with the onboarding.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to sort of that psychology aspect when you think about a user psychology and when you think about onboarding. Like the industry definitely talks about these wow moments and trying to create as many of these wow moments along that onboarding journey as possible. Because if you think about it, it's like somebody arrives at your product with excitement, they want to get going, but then you start putting them to work. So you start saying, okay, like I need you to fill in a form now, I need you to submit an application. And as you're putting them through these different steps, their psychology starts dipping and starts losing motivation going throughout. So the more you can keep wowing them with these small little touches of, like you say, like really being proactive, like giving you an informed status of where you're at in that process and when things are going to be happening. Like for you now, this has created a mini wow moment in the sense that you haven't really got the value yet, the product that is going to deliver and the reason that you're signing up for it. But these are already good indications that are making you feel better about this decision that you've made. So they're bringing your psychology back up there and allowing you to put in a little bit more effort and a little bit more work to get you to that point where you're going to start to receive the value. So I think companies that do this really, really well is they have this good understanding that people are like impatient today. Like everybody wants everything now. So the faster you can get a person to that point of value or to that point where you're wowing them within that subscription process, the more chance that you have of keeping them happy and keeping them with you. And then to the value aspect, I think this is also something that some of the best companies that I've spoken to so far have a really good way of measuring. So one of our episodes, I interviewed GoDaddy, and if you're familiar, they're a domain broker, but they also have a lot of different other services now that they've expanded on when it comes to hosting or website building. And what GoDaddy have done really, really well in one of their products, which is their site builder, is they've actually found a way to be able to measure customer value. So a lot of the time when we have subscription products, we look at product usage metrics and we see how are people using our product. But really, people didn't come to us to use our product. They came to us to get the value out of our product. And a lot of times that value might be a little bit abstract and a little bit difficult to measure. But the more you can get close to measuring the actual value that people get out of your product and increasing that, the more successful your product and your company is going to be. So in GoDaddy's case, what they realized was people came to them to get exposure. So they didn't come to them to build a website. They actually came to build a website that was going to get traffic. And they're in the fortunate position where they actually can measure this because people are building websites with them, they're hosting it with them. But then through that, what they realized was that a lot of the things that they could then do and they could then push forward in their onboarding process and really help the customers with all revolved around getting traffic. So having the use of the data they had, they saw that companies that had connected social profiles to their website had 3 times more traffic than those that didn't. So that was immediately initially one of those things that they started then prompting new signups to do is okay, now that you set up your site, make sure you're connecting it to your social channels. Sites that connect them get 3 times more traffic. And they managed to really, really nail this now in their new product is they're not just measuring are people setting up a website, are they using it, are they coming in updating content, but really the value for their customers is website traffic, or in an e-shop's environment it's sales, or in a hairdresser salon it's bookings. And they've managed to be able to find a metric in the way that they can measure the actual value that they're delivering their customers. And I think for me is if companies can find a way to get to that point where they can measure the actual value that their customers get from their product and they work towards optimizing and improving that, that's where they see the biggest success when it comes to churn and retention. Because at the very basic and rawest form, churn is all about, churn only happens when you're not delivering value. If people are not satisfied with your product and they're not receiving value, they're going to leave. And it's as basic as that. So when you think about the problem and the challenge is being able to measure that value you deliver and measure it really well to the extent that you know what to do and how to improve it and how to increase the value you deliver. That's where I think the companies really, really excel.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And that example highlights to me another aspect, which is understanding what value you're actually bringing. So in GoDaddy's case, they have a system where people can build websites in the system, but the website is a tool to do something else, whether it be to generate leads, which comes about because the website gets lots of traffic, or whether it's sales, which again, you need a lot of traffic to the website so that you get lots of sales from it. So they understood that whilst their product might have been the website and the platform to build the website, what the user actually needed was deeper than that. And so by measuring that and by helping people get those things, that they're actually providing much greater value, and by doing that they're differentiating themselves from competition.
Absolutely.
It's a really good example. So talking of analytics, I mean, one of the things on your resume obviously is working as the business subscription manager at Hotjar. Now tell us a little bit more about what Hotjar do and how the Hotjar analytics can help people find out what's happening on their own websites or their apps, and perhaps address this idea of customer retention and wowing the customer.
Yeah, so I think Hotjar is probably one of the best tools in the arsenal when it comes to reducing churn and increasing retention. And so for those that don't know what Hotjar is, we're a user feedback and behavior analytics tool. And essentially, Hotjar gives you what traditional analytics can't. So we give you the why behind the what. And if you think about like traditional tools like Google Analytics that complement Hotjar, like with those tools, you can really understand what is happening on your site, how many visitors you're getting to certain pages, where people are dropping off, but you don't necessarily understand why that is happening. So Hotjar provides a series of user feedback and behavior analytics tools that allow you to get instant feedback from customers through things like on-page surveys or feedback widgets that really sort of help you understand why things are happening on your site. And then we provide behavior analytics tools like heat maps and session recordings that really allow you to see and understand the behavior. So a heat map allows you to visualize like where people have clicked, tapped, or scrolled on your page, so you can get an understanding of like what content is being seen, what is not, what are people clicking on the most from that aspect on specific pages, so you can understand there. And then session recordings actually allow you to see like a playback of that user session, so you can actually see where they went, what they were scrolling at, how much time they spent on specific sections of the page. And then more often than not, like those are used to understand, like see where something might not be 100% right or something's going wrong. And then our customers are using user feedback or prompting them with on-page surveys to really try and understand. So if they see maybe a potential problem at checkout and people are going to make a purchase, but they're stopping at a certain step, they could then trigger an on-page survey at that step and say to their user or their visitor, like, is there something else we can help you with today? Is something missing on this page? So really helping you combine sort of that what and why, like you understand what's going on your site, but then you can also have that ability to understand why it's happening.
Yeah, and it certainly is a wonderful tool that enables you to really dig deep in that. But of course, tools like that are only as good as what you do with the information that they provide. So it still comes back to using that information in the interaction with the customer, right, and providing that wow experience.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important of understanding who the customer is. And I think this is probably the biggest key aspect of using any tool correctly is if you don't have a really, really strong idea of who your ideal customer is, at the end of the day, then no matter what tool you use, no matter how you're collecting feedback or how you're analyzing behavior, if you're not analyzing the right behavior and like taking insights and taking action from the right user feedback, you end up doing nothing. And I think like this was probably one of the bigger lessons learned from David when it comes to collecting user feedback. And his analogy was actually a Star Wars analogy that he gave us when he shared it with us. But typically on any website, you have three types of visitors. You have those people that are going to come to your site that are always going to be customers, that your product was the right fit, they were going to sign up no matter what. You have another group of customers that were never going to be customers. They maybe arrived on your site by mistake, or they just were out of curiosity or intrigue, clicked a button, but then quickly bounced. And then you have a middle group of customers who not too sure about your product. They're trying to feel their way through. Some of them will make it through the end of the funnel and they'll purchase. The others won't. And asking and collecting feedback or analyzing behavior at the wrong moments can really lead you down the wrong track. So if you think about starting to ask a question on your homepage of what can we do to improve the experience, or what would make you buy today, if you're collecting feedback from those three different groups, you're getting very mixed signals in terms of what you should be acting on and what you should be optimizing on. So when you think about collecting feedback, you're much better off really understanding and focusing on that core audience and that middle audience. And instead of focusing on the early stages, really once people have just purchased, asking them a question, what made you nearly not purchase today? And in that way, you're getting feedback and insights from your people that are always going to be customers, but you're also getting feedback from those customers who weren't too sure and finding their way through, as opposed to you trying to get feedback too early on or at the wrong stage, where you're collecting from people that were never going to be your customers. And then you taking this feedback in and you bring it back to the team and you're thinking hey, how do we act on this? And by not having that clear distinction, understanding who are the customers and not having that right time to be asking for feedback or right time to be analyzing behavior, you end up getting these very, very mixed signals. And then at the end of the day, your efforts become useless, like you say, not having you can have all the tools in the world, but not really knowing how to use them in the right time and who to be using them on. They not very, very helpful at all.
Yeah, that's a really succinct explanation of why it's important to understand who your customer is. And also if you're using a tool like Hotjar, where you might be asking questions on different pages. Obviously, asking on the homepage, what are you looking to buy today is possibly the wrong question. It may be a case of, how can we help you understand whether this is the place you want to be or not, might be a more appropriate question. And then when people get to a purchase page, that's when you perhaps ask the question, are you ready to buy, and what's influencing your decision? Yeah.
And I think the most powerful one was once they've actually purchased, is asking them what nearly made them not purchase today. Because that's where you're going to get some of the most honest and direct feedback as well, because you've just had people successfully go through that funnel. They've just experienced maybe some of the potential frustration, but they persevered and they made it through. So the feedback that you're going to be getting there is really direct. It's timely as well. So it's exactly when they've experienced this and once they've gone through it. So you're not asking a week later or 2 weeks down the line. It's fresh. It's in their mind. And it's some of the most powerful feedback, I think, if anybody has an e-commerce store or has a purchase flow that you'll do is that specific question.
That's right. And probably people are less reluctant to hold back if they've got some less than flattering feedback at that point, because they've just spent money, so their expectation is really high that there's going to be value delivered. And so if you're asking me at that point, what can I do better, I'm probably highly motivated to let you know what frustrated me during that process. And that really is another fantastic way to kind of a little thing to add to an onboarding process.
Yeah, exactly. And then as well, you're getting feedback from customers. So you're acting and you're making improvements based on people that are going to be similar to those customers as well afterwards. So you're really improving your product to try and help more people who are potential customers get rid of that frustration and get rid of that concern of your product. So.
Yeah. So in a general sense, in that kind of situation, what steps do you recommend for, so let's say you've gathered some feedback, you've got a bunch of people that have bought your product or service, they've given you some feedback that said, this bit frustrated me. This bit was hard to do, but still I got through and I bought. But, it'd be much better if that worked easier or there was less steps or whatever it might be. So what are the other things that you should do to follow up on that feedback?
Yeah, so I think, the following up on the feedback really is trying to understand and build a business case. So this is what we see at Hotjar, like some of the typical, the best companies that are using our tool. The way they use it is they're using it to build a business case to understand what changes need to be made. So like you said, you receive certain pieces of feedback in part of your funnel or your flow that need to be improved. They would then go and take a look at session recordings or look at heat maps and try to understand, okay, we're receiving this feedback. People don't enjoy this part of this process. Let's see where they're getting stuck, or let's see what they're not enjoying. And then from there, they would build up this business case and they would start running tests. So by that, they would run a test to see a different version of that onboarding flow versus the existing, and they would run an A/B test to see like how conversions are impacted. Has this improved the experience? And then they would typically potentially also run something is like a version of a CSAT, which is like an effort score. So they would want to see like, okay, how difficult was it, this checkout process for you today? And over time, through the different tests that they run and different optimizations, what they really want to be doing is continuously improving and reducing the amount of effort that people need to do to make it through their process. And they want to make sure that satisfaction is up there. So they would then could also look at things like the customer effort score, or they could be measuring CSAT throughout this process as well. But really it comes down to testing, experimentation, and optimizing on those experiments afterwards. And then continuously using those feedback loops and those like behavior analytics loops to understand like, okay, have we made a difference? Have we improved this? Keeping an eye on conversion. Have we increased conversion? Has it impacted, if looking a little bit further down the line, things like LTV? And yeah, so just continuous experimentation from there.
So that's how you take the information you get and kind of work internally to improve that. How do you feed back to the client so that, the customers had this onboarding process where they've purchased the service, they've given you some feedback that identified areas of improvement? How do you kind of keep the client in the loop during that process and so that they get a sense, first of all, that their input was valued, and secondly, they've got some sort of idea of what might be happening in the future to address some of the issues they've raised?
Yeah, so there's a few different tools that help you do this well. So I think one of the tools we use internally at Hotjar is called Receptive. And Receptive is a platform that allows customers to provide input and feedback on your product and what improvements they'd like to see and to be made. To the specific case that you're speaking about now for the onboarding process, it doesn't have much of an impact to existing customers because they're only going to go through that experience once. But for other things where they provide a feedback and inputs on your product where they want to see improvements, like having an update and receiving we actually made this update, it's just been released, is a really, really powerful way to keep customers happy and excited about you and feel like you're listening to them. So tools like Receptive that we use internally at Hotjar to track product changes, the product requests that are coming from our customers, they allow you to tag specific users with the product and the update, and then when it comes time to making that product announcement to let customers and users know that changes have been made, you can also then target specifically those users that actually requested that specific update or that specific change to be made. And then we typically try and reach out to them and say, this is something that you're asking for, we've delivered now, like please let us know and we'd love to hear your feedback. So something that we're always trying to continuously do as well is not just deliver on the product, but then once we've delivered, really make sure that we're following up and seeing all the improvements that can be made. How have those that have previously given us feedback responding to this change? Do they feel that it's an improvement, or like have we screwed up? So it's important not to just take on board feedback, go get lost in a bunker, build something and then deploy it and then expect things to be good. It's a continuous process, and something we introduced as well at Hotjar, we actually got this from a really good blog post on First Round Capital, is the concept of a customer advisory board. And essentially what our customer advisory board is, it's made up of individuals who fit our ideal customer profile. And we've invited them into our internal Slack, which is our communication platform we use as a team. We have a channel for our customer advisory board, and we have regular communication with them there. So we have this two-way communication constantly. Like we have sketches of something new we're thinking about designing, we throw them in there. We have some new marketing material we want to push out, it goes in there. We have content we're looking to produce, we want help with and feedback on from our customers. We have this continuous loop and feedback going backwards and forwards between us. So I think the closer you can get to the customer, the more you continuously get feedback and iterate on that feedback, and then checking in on that feedback as well. The more powerful the changes that you make and your product becomes.
Yeah, I love the customer advisory board. I've seen a couple. I've been on a couple with companies that do that kind of thing, and with the technology that's available today, like the Slack channels, that where you can have kind of live conversation, as it were, about ideas and, like you say, improvements and test things out.
And I've noticed a difference with our team internally is that like it's difficult sometimes if you're not the person conducting the interviews or the one that's created the survey or the feedback widget to empathize with the feedback. But when your teammates and your team is really having these direct conversations continuously, like I've seen a lot more action happening and a lot more like quick turnaround, I'd say, of like some of the challenges or the frustrations. So in the past, we would see like suggestions coming into receptive and they would go into a backlog, they would get prioritized, and then we would try to make things happen. But with this customer advisory board is typically like somebody would put in a message early in the morning, like I've had this frustration, why isn't this way? And then like the team has generally responded quite a lot quicker to these responses, because I think you get to empathize a lot easier with people when you're actually speaking to them over a chat or on a call. So I think it's just good all the time is not just to rely totally on feedback, but then also like how to make sure that the team and the company can empathize as best as possible with that feedback. And sometimes it's putting a face to a name, sometimes it's getting your team members on calls with customers, other times it could be things like the customer advisory board and just getting them as close to the customer as possible.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but I think what you said at the end there is the key thing is being really close to the customer and keeping engaged with them, and having a two-way communication.
Yeah, and not offering specials to new customers and not existing customers.
Yeah. Yes, that's one that continues to puzzle me and annoy me when I'm the existing customer. All right, well, I could go on talking forever about customer retention and what constitutes great customer service, and something you said earlier on. I'd like to come back to just briefly, which is around there's a sales team and there's a marketing team, and they kind of in the traditional sense, particularly in the larger companies, their job, the sales team, is to bring new business in, the marketing team to kind of bring new leads in. But to me, the purpose of marketing is really just to have that open communication right across the board from the very start of the customer journey right through to the ongoing customer journey, which if you take that long-term view and look at customer lifetime value, is hopefully in a good business is kind of a very long-term relationship, and the same for the sales team. And I know that some companies, they don't really have salespeople as such. The salespeople are kind of like account managers, they call them, and they're the people that maintain the relationship with existing customers. And yes, they do bring new customers on board, but maintaining the relationships with existing customers is a really core part of their business. So I think that's definitely something that I firmly believe in, and I know from what you've said, that's kind of the approach that you're taking as well, and the businesses that you mentioned as examples sound like they're doing that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm a believer as well, like product, I think, is the new marketing. and the teams that really understand that and really focus to improve that product, and then their marketing teams themselves, like you say, are really there to communicate the value of that product as opposed to really try and bring in and the focus on new leads, and then making sure that they're aligning what they're promising on the marketing front with what the product actually delivers, and then continuously showing their company, their users and their customers how they can continue to receive that value and what changes are being made and how the product is being updated. For me, that's where like companies see the biggest impact. And then obviously marketing it's always going to be around to try and acquire leads and bring in new people in the door, but really their focus is evolving more around like, okay, how do we make sure people are getting the most value out of our product, and what are the things we can doing in terms of the content that we create and the different channels that we're reaching out and the messages that we're doing in terms of our ads. Like, is it really just sort of that pull versus push methodology, or are we really providing value? Like, how can we provide value to our customers as a marketing team before they become customers, so that when they are customers, they have a really good understanding of how to use our tool and how they can extract value and how they can get the most use out of our tool.
Yeah, I love it. Great. All right, I think it's time we moved on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So I'm sure that there'll be some really insightful answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today, and particularly focused on the area of customer retention. So what do you think the number one thing is that anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I think the number one thing is to really have that solid understanding of the ideal customer. Like, it's really who you are. And too many times people get too generic with this and too wide with this to begin with. And I think in the early days, it's really, really, really critical to have that super specific, hyper-focused understanding of who that ideal customer is. And there's different ways that you can go about achieving this. And it's depending if it's a new user base, then you'd maybe potentially need to use something like a panel and understand like the market itself. If you have an existing customer base, it's really looking at, okay, who are our most active, engaged customers? Who are those that have been with us the longest and potentially spending the most? And the way you can start to segment and then understand, like, get a better understanding of the demographics, the company size, like which markets are they in, and really trying to be as specific as possible will then allow you to become really innovative in that place. Because a lot of times people try to build products that are a catch-all and are mediocre for everyone, but not great for anyone. So having that really good and solid understanding of who that ideal customer is really allows your product, your marketing, customer success to focus in and hone on it and become innovative and really be able to create solutions that are going to fit and meet their needs, as opposed to barely scratch the surface of the needs of the vast majority. So I'd say focus on ideal customer.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, the regular listeners of this show will know that I'm always on about getting really clear about your ideal customer. That's where we start our whole marketing process. So that really resonates with me. So what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas or new product?
It's focus on the ideal customer.
Yeah, listen to the customer. Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely, I mean, it's definitely a balance that needs to be struck, because it's that concept of like your customer doesn't always know what they want. And I think there's that quote, is it Henry Ford, if you asked what people wanted, they'd say foster horses, but people do know what they want. It's your understanding, your interpretation is what's critical in this process. So it's really, really critical to speak to customers to understand their needs and to understand what they're looking for, but it's not necessarily your job to take what they tell you word for word and try and implement that as well. So becoming really, really good at understanding customer feedback and knowing how to decipher it and knowing to understand like really what at the core is what they're looking for. And a good way, I think this is something I learned as well at Hotjar, I think it was from Louis Grenier. He's also the host of Everyone Hates Marketers. Is when you ask a question to a customer in a customer feedback session, at the surface, you're just getting a surface answer. So diving a little bit deeper and asking why 2 or 3 times after a question, you really start to scratch on the pain and scratch on the problem. So a lot of times when you're speaking to customers, you're collecting feedback, you might get an initial response that sounds good and sounds like a reasonable solution to their problem that you could potentially implement in your product. But really, when you start to dive deeper and you start to speak to the customer and you get to the real core of the problem, a lot of the times the solutions there that come out of the core problem, can be a lot more innovative, a lot more exciting, and actually a lot more valuable when it comes to, because you're not really taking at the surface level of what a customer maybe thinks is the right idea of thing, but really diving to what that problem is that they're having, and like what are the existing solutions out there, and then what you can do to innovate to make it and improve it.
Yeah, that's a really great strategy, and I love asking why and digging deeper, and often you find that there are actually more core needs than what's first articulated, and gives you some great ideas.
Yeah. And people are generally bad at feedback. It's one of those things, is like it becomes maybe in our nature where we try to be too nice all the time as humans, which is, it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing when trying to collect user feedback. So you really need to as well, like, make the people that you're speaking to feel as comfortable as possible, to be open and transparent as possible. So always trying to encourage that, and then trying to dig deeper and making them feel comfortable about sharing and providing that feedback.
All right. So do you have a favorite resource that you use most often, apart from Hotjar?
I was going to say, like, it was just too easy. But jokes aside, like, Hotjar is probably for me, like, not probably, it is the number one tool and resource I would say and go to. And that goes to the point that I was using Hotjar way before I ever joined Hotjar. So it's one of the early users. And it was one of those, my go-to tools always when it came to innovating and improving the product. Because it really gives you that first-hand view of what's going on your app or your site. It brings you closer to the customer in many different ways with the user feedback and following on the user sessions and journeys. So it's definitely hands down for me the number one tool when it comes to building products.
All right. And what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
So for me, the communication is the number one thing when it comes to keeping a project with clients on track. Having clear milestones and understanding, and I think then being realistic as well. This is one thing I've learned over time, is that it's super critical to be as critical with yourself as possible of what's manageable and achievable within a time period. And it's way better to be overly... let's say like it's not good to be overly optimistic, and it's much better to be pessimistic to some extent, to make sure that you are meeting and hitting deadlines, because at the end of the day, that's how you keep the team motivated, that's how you keep your clients excited, and it's how you deliver on projects. So really being critical about what's achievable in a time period, and having that strong communication set out with deadlines and milestones of what's going to be achieved is the best way.
Yeah, and that's all part of a good customer experience along their journey, as as they go through the customer journey with you, and of course, that's going to maximize retention as well.
Absolutely, it's something I like. I think I've learned quite a lot since joining Hotjar as well, because we are a remote company. So you understand the need a lot more of communication and how important it is when you have this distance. And this is typically what you do with clients as well. You don't have your clients in your office where you're working with them all the time. So that communication needs to be constant, ongoing, clear. It needs to be easy to find and understand. And you never want customers or you never want teammates to be asking why things are the way they are. They just need to know. And that comes through that transparency and communication.
Yeah, I like that. I like the analogy of the client communication, similar to the remote team communication.
Yeah.
All right. And what's the number one thing you think anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I think the number one thing is to be continuously learning, to be curious, and then to pick a specific problem or niche or interest that really excites you and motivates you, and dig deep and understand as much as you can about that specific problem or pain point or niche. Like going deep really helps you to start to differentiate, and having a clear focus of how you position yourself as a human. So a lot of times, like, we think about product positioning and how you position your company, but thinking about how do you want to position yourself in the market, how do you want people to see you, and what do they want them to know you for, really gives you a good idea of how you can then start to differentiate yourself and where you want to be focusing. And it all starts, I think, I guess, as well as like what excites you, because if something doesn't excite you and doesn't motivate you, going deep or differentiating yourself in that specific area doesn't make much sense. So having a clear understanding what makes you happy, then focusing on that, and then positioning yourself so that people see you as that is.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's got to be something that really excites you and you're passionate about. All right. Thanks, Andrew. This has been really great. So where can people reach out and find out more about you and even say thank you?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's been great joining as well. So for those listening, like as you mentioned, I'm the host of Churn.fm. People can reach out to me either via Twitter at AndrewMichaelSA, or they can email me directly at andrew@churn.fm. Any questions, if you have any follow-ups that you'd like to find out or more information as well, or questions that you'd like for me to ask on the show, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, once again, thanks very, very much, Jürgen, for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure chatting today.
Great. Well, two more questions. What's the number one piece of advice you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation and in their field?
Piece of advice. Yeah, so get close to the customer. Continuously speaking to your customer, like I said to that Henry Ford quote, like a lot of times people think it's counterintuitive, but really it's like being as close to the customer as possible and having that deep understanding of like how to decipher user feedback. So not just taking it at surface level, but really getting to the core of it and then being able to innovate on that.
Yeah, that's great advice and consistent with what we've been talking about all through the conversation today. Finally, then, who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast and why?
So I think David Cancel from Drift for me would be a super interesting person to hear from. Been following David's work over the years, and he's probably one of the most innovative product guys out there. So he's doing amazing things with Drift. They're creating a whole new market when it comes to conversational marketing now. And throughout his career, he's managed to have these hits one after the other. So I think he'd definitely be a person I'd love to hear from.
Okay, well, we'll get an introduction from you to David and reach out to him and get him on the podcast as well. So thanks again, Andrew. It's been great that you've joined us and shared your time and insights with us so generously on the InnovaBuzz podcast today. I've really enjoyed this. There's lots of great advice and ideas there around how you can learn from customer feedback, how you can get closer to customers and interpret their feedback and really understand their needs, and how you can use that to improve or maximize customer retention, which I think is something that most businesses should be really doing to the best of their ability. So I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Thanks very much again. Definitely.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and informative conversation with Andrew and took something away from what he shared with us today. He gave some wonderful tips about the onboarding process, getting feedback from your ideal customers at key points of their customer journey, and how to engage your customers in the improvement process. I'd love to know what you took away from Andrew's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Andrew Michael. That is AndrewMichael, all lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Andrew Michael. Now, you'll also find contact information there for getting in touch with Andrew, as well as links to the Hotjar website, to his social media pages, and, of course, the Churn FM podcast, as well as any other resources we spoke about in our conversation. Andrew suggested we interview David Cancel from Drift on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So, David, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Andrew Michael. Remember to visit innovabiz.co/VIP to access your transformational marketing hub and all its free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. Also, go check out our Tales of Marketing Transformation show and listen in there at talesofmarketingtransformation.com, where each episode is going to provide one valuable message to guide you on your journey of marketing transformation. And tune in again next week to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we have more fantastic guests lined up, including Emanuela Grace from Find Your Voice and Adam Murray of the Subtle Disruptor podcast. Stay connected. Subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you'll make sure you'll never miss another episode. Head on over to innovabiz.co/subscribe. We'd also love you to leave us a review, because what you think matters to us. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, or questions, then share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic Facebook community at the Tales of Marketing Transformation Facebook group. All you have to do is go to innovabiz.co/TMA. It's free to join. I hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.